Prior to that, had your home been subject to any searches or seizures?
Not our house, but our neighbors' houses were. The FBI just came in and looked through everything, especially if they were going to take the male head of household away. I had a friend whose brother was a truck driver, and he was supposed to take different crates of vegetables to different areas, and he had a map with a destination marked from Los Angeles, San Diego. And the FBI found that map, and they questioned him about what he was doing in all these places. And they said, you know, there are certain areas where there are strategic naval bases and army bases, and they thought he was going after those places. He said, no, I'm just delivering the fruit and vegetables. But he couldn't convince them.
What other things were they looking for?
I think they were looking for spies and people who might be going to these areas to maybe blow up the place or take pictures or whatever, which none of us were ever doing.
And I guess they were looking for certain artifacts that they thought would be associated with that.
Right, yeah. And then, of course, I'm not sure where it came from, maybe the government, U.S. government, or from L.A., but we had to turn in all our flashlights and radios, shortwave, guns, knives, whatever, that they thought was contraband.
Cameras.
We never got them back.
Say that again.
We never got those back.
Tell me about Executive Order 9066 and what that did.
Well, I understand that General DeWitt went to Washington. He had two lieutenants under him who were basically the people who put together the whole thing. And they went to Washington. They convinced the congressional delegation from California and Washington and Oregon and the Attorney General and what they call the War Department that because we hadn't done anything, there was a possibility that we would do something to sabotage the war effort, and that they had to remove us from the coast. And in the meantime, they said that the Japanese submarines had had thrown, had taken shots at Santa Barbara coast and Alaska, and it turned out that they were actually U.S. ships. And there was a lot of hysteria about that. So the Washington delegation talked to President Roosevelt. And I think only one person, Francis Biddle, who was Attorney General, and the head of the FBI, were opposed to any movement of the Japanese, but the others convinced the president to sign the order.
And what did that order state?
The order stated that the West Coast was to be considered a military area, and because of military necessity, originally it was persons of German, Italian, and Japanese ancestry were to be removed and housed in appropriate areas away from the West Coast. And then by the time General DeWitt put out the order, it became persons who were of Japanese ancestry, and it said both alien and non-alien. They used the word non-alien because if they had used the word citizen, they were afraid, he was afraid that they would get sued and that they would lose the case. But they used the term military necessity. And of course it was later found that there was no military necessity at all.
What can you tell me about the Munson Report?
The Munson Report was, I believe, authorized by the president, and the U.S. Naval Intelligence was asked to study the Japanese community, Japanese American community. And they found that over pretty close to 98% of the Japanese would not do anything to sabotage or or do espionage against the United States, and that basically we were very loyal to the United States. Roosevelt took the report, but he never actually gave orders to any of his cabinet members to check on the report, and so it was never used, and so it ended up that all of us were sent to camp.
By the time the war was over, how many Japanese or Japanese Americans were found guilty of espionage?
None that I know of.
Tell me that as a whole sentence.
What was that again?
Just repeat my question as a statement to tell me.
Oh, as far as I know, by the end of the war, there were no convictions or arrests of any person of Japanese ancestry who was, accused of conspiracy or sabotage or espionage. I believe there were a couple of Germans that were found arrested and found guilty.
When the camps were set up, give me the overview of numbers of camps and numbers of people that were affected.
Well, Manzanar was the first one that was built, and it was called an assembly or reception center. And I guess they were going to use that originally to put people there, and then move them further inland. But then they started to build what they call assembly centers in fairgrounds and Santa Anita racetracks. I think there's a Tanforan racetrack up north. In Seattle, they had fairgrounds also. And they were used to place people in there temporarily. And then from there, permanent camps were built, and there were 10 of them. One in Heart Mountain, Wyoming, 2 in California, Tule Lake and Manzanar. And Arizona had 2 posts in Arizona and Gila River. And Granada or Amachi in Colorado, Minidoka, Idaho, Topaz, Utah. And then there were 2 camps in Arkansas, Jerome and Rower. And I think that was it, Minidoka, Topaz. And the 2 in Arkansas were called Jerome and Rower.
So how many people were affected by the time the war was over?
By the time the war was over, there were about 120,313 people affected. Now, they were not all sent to the 10 government camps. There are others that were sent to immigration and naturalization centers, the Justice Department camps, places like Crystal City, Texas, where families of the head of the household that were arrested were put. There's Missoula, Montana, where aliens were kept, and Bismarck, South Dakota is another place. Santa Fe, New Mexico was another one. And these are places where the original arrested people on December 7th were sent. Then there were 2 camps called Moab, Utah, and Duke, Idaho, where so-called troublemakers were picked up from the camps and put there. And of course, there are a number of other assembly centers and camps that I don't know about, but they were there.